In a grand hall illuminated by thousands of chandeliers, the annual event titled Dialogue of Love and Faith was taking place. Hundreds of religious leaders from various backgrounds filled the majestic room dressed in their distinctive clerical garments, sitting side by side, sharing perspectives on love, peace, and spirituality. In the middle row sat Reverend Helena, a 35-year-old woman. Her brown hair flowed neatly behind the white clerical collar, and her calm eyes reflected the faith of someone who had long lived for God. Among her peers, she was known as a gentle yet principled soul. Yet behind her soft smile, Helena carried a restlessness. For years, she had felt her spirit walking through fog. She prayed, preached, and served, but her heart often whispered, "Why do I feel God is so far away, when I speak of Him every day?" The event opened with greetings from the committee, then the first session began, Divine Love in the Perspective of Faith. Speakers came from many religions. One of the last scheduled was a young Muslim woman of about 25, named Aisha. When her name was called, few knew her. She appeared simple, wearing a light blue hijab and a long cream-colored dress. Her voice was calm but filled with conviction. She carried no thick notes, only a small piece of paper in her hand. God, she began softly, does not ask us merely to speak about Him, but to know Him. In Islam, we are taught that true love for God grows from knowing who He is, not just what we feel about Him. Helena watched her from a distance. There was something in the way Aisha spoke, clear, deep, yet never condescending. She spoke as though her heart truly knew the peace Helena had long been yearning for. In the Quran, Aisha continued, God says, "And we are closer to Him than His jugular vein." This verse always brings me to tears, because it reminds me God was never far away. It is we who often walk away. Those words seemed to knock on the empty space in Helena's chest. When the session ended, the participants stood for a break. Without much thought, Helena approached Aisha, who was sipping mineral water in a quiet corner. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Helena asked politely. "Of course," Aisha replied with a warm smile. "I want to know, how can you speak about God with such certainty, with such warmth?" "Because I love Him," Aisha said simply. "And that love makes me want to keep knowing Him." Helena looked into Aisha's eyes, searching for something, perhaps answers, perhaps courage. "I've served God all my life," she said quietly. "But lately, I feel empty. I know He exists, but I don't feel Him anymore." "Maybe," Aisha said gently, "you've been searching for Him in places that no longer bring peace to your heart." They sat on a small bench outside the hall. The evening breeze brushed softly. Aisha began to tell her story, how she once felt distant from God, until she began reading the Quran and discovered that every verse was a tender greeting from the Creator. "I used to fear God," Aisha said. "I thought He only judged. But after learning, I realized His mercy is wider than the heavens and the earth. That's what made me fall in love with Him." Helena was silent. Her eyes began to water. Those words pierced deeper than she expected. She did not hear a call to change her religion, she heard someone speaking of true love for God. That night, in her hotel room, Helena opened her Bible and the Quran translation she had just borrowed from the event library. She flipped to a random page, and her eyes landed on the verse, "Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth." Helena froze. She read it again, slowly, her heart pounding. A strange peace began to fill her, the feeling she had been searching for all this time. Tears fell without her knowing why. In a whisper, she said within herself, "God, if you are truly as that girl said, then guide me to you." In the days that followed, Helena continued speaking with Aisha. They spent hours discussing Prophet Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad, about love, sacrifice, and sincerity in worship. There were no debates, only dialogue born from the heart. Helena was amazed by the simplicity of Islam: one God, one direction, one purpose. She read about prayer, about ablution, about the act of complete submission to God. She cried again when she read about Prophet Jesus being called Ruhullah, the Spirit of God, not God Himself, but His beloved servant. One afternoon, in the same garden where they first spoke, Helena looked at Aisha and said with a trembling voice, "I want to know the God you know, in the way that you live." Aisha held her hands tightly. "If it's truly from your heart, then say it with your heart." Helena bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then, with a trembling voice, she uttered the words that would change her life forever. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The air felt still. The birds seemed to pause, and the world went silent in reverence. Helena the Reverend, who had once sought the light, now felt it filling her heart for the first time. Months later, she chose a new name, Hannah. Not because she wanted to forget her past, but because she wished to mark a new beginning. She remained a servant no longer from a church pulpit, but from small gatherings where she shared the peace of Islam with those seeking truth. And every time she saw Aisha, she smiled, remembering the day when a simple conversation in the midst of a grand event had guided her to the light she had been searching for all along. 6 months had passed since the day Helena, now Hannah, uttered the 2 declarations of faith. Her life changed slowly, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, steady steps. She began learning to read the Quran, though her tongue still stumbled over the words. She learned to pray 5 times a day, sometimes holding back tears from a feeling too deep to describe. Each time she bowed in prostration, Hannah felt as though she laid all her burdens before God and He embraced her with tenderness. But not everyone understood her journey. One morning, Hannah received a call from the church where she had once served. The voice on the other end belonged to Pastor Michael, her old colleague and friend since seminary days. "Helena, I heard something strange," he said bluntly. "You left the ministry and you converted to Islam. Is that true?" Hannah fell silent for a moment and took a deep breath. "Yes, Michael. It's true. I haven't left God, I've found Him in a new way. Do you realize what you're doing?" His voice carried disappointment. "You're destroying your own reputation. People will think you've lost your way." "Maybe," Hannah replied softly, "but I'm more afraid of losing the truth that God has shown me." The call ended in long silence. Hannah looked at her phone, her chest tight. She knew many would turn away from her. But she also knew the path toward light is rarely an easy one. In the days that followed, Hannah began living more simply. She moved to a small house on the outskirts of town. Every dawn, she woke for prayer and wept in her prostration, asking for strength to stay steadfast. Aisha often visited her, bringing food and a warm smile. She never treated Hannah as a former pastor or new convert, only as a sister in faith. "You know," Aisha said one evening as they shared dinner, "in Islam, everyone who seeks and finds the truth will be tested. But Allah never leaves His servant alone." Hannah smiled faintly. "I know. Sometimes I'm afraid, but somehow my heart feels at peace. I used to have many friends, many followers at church. But none of them ever made me feel this close to God." One day, Hannah received a message from Pastor Michael. He wanted to meet just to talk, not to debate, he wrote. They met at a small cafe. Hannah wore a soft gray hijab. Michael looked at her for a long moment, as if struggling to recognize the woman who once stood beside him at the pulpit. "You look different," he finally said. "There's something in your face, calm, though I can't tell if it's peace or surrender." Hannah smiled gently. "Perhaps it's both." "I don't understand, Helena. You had everything. Why choose such a difficult path?" Hannah looked down at her coffee cup, then said quietly, "Because I found God not in comfort, but in honesty. I stopped looking for answers that pleased others and began seeking the truth that touched my heart." Michael said nothing. But in his eyes, Hannah saw something, not anger, but the same confusion she had once known herself. They parted in silence. That night, however, Michael sent her a short message. "If God gives you peace, then perhaps I'm the one who needs to understand." Hannah stared at the screen for a long time, then smiled. She knew a small seed had been planted not to convert, but to awaken light in another heart. Years passed. Hannah became known in interfaith circles. She never spoke ill of her former faith, she simply shared her story, a journey toward true peace. She was often invited to interreligious seminars to speak about love, forgiveness, and spiritual transformation. And each time she spoke, people were moved not because she had changed religions, but because of the sincerity that shone from her eyes. "I didn't leave God," she said at one such event. "I just followed the light He showed me. And when I reached the end of that search, I found Islam not as a new religion, but as a home for my soul." That night, after the event ended, Aisha came to see her. "You know," Aisha said softly, "I never imagined that our small conversation would change your life this way." Hannah looked at her with gratitude. "You didn't change my life, Aisha. You only knocked on a door that had long been closed. It was God who opened it." The night sky was clear, stars scattered above them. Aisha looked up and whispered, "And look now how bright that light has become." Hannah smiled, her eyes glistening as she gazed at the stars. "Yes, that light now lives within my heart." Time keeps moving, yet Hannah's story lives on, not because she was once a pastor who later found Islam, but because she became a witness that truth always finds its way, even through the weariest of hearts. Now she walks through life with calm steps. Not everyone understands her choice, but anyone who looks into her face can sense something indescribable, a gentle peace, a quiet light. Hannah no longer searches for God outside herself, she has found Him in her prostration, in the whispers of her prayers, and in every breath that reminds her life is a journey toward His mercy. And if one day someone were to ask her what light means to her, she would smile and reply, "Light is not something I see, but something that now lives within my heart."